The Subcommittee on Human Rights and the Law will come to order. 8 months ago, as Senator Blackburn and I discussed the highest purposes to which we could apply this subcommittee, we agreed that protecting our nation's most vulnerable children was a shared priority and a moral imperative. We then opened together this bipartisan inquiry into the welfare of children in foster care. To date, the subcommittee has interviewed over 100 witnesses and sources and has reviewed thousands of pages of records. And this work continues today with our first public hearing on the human rights of foster children in the United States. I thank you, Ranking Member Blackburn, for your participation and your ongoing contributions to this bipartisan effort, which demonstrate to the nation that elected officials in Washington can put the interests of children above partisan politics. Naturally, representing the state of Georgia, I've taken a particular interest in the health, safety, and treatment of children in my state. In recent years, multiple independent oversight bodies in Georgia have raised the alarm about serious failures to protect children from abuse and neglect. In 2021, according to Georgia's Office of the Child Advocate, or OCA, Georgia DFACS received reports directly from several local child advocacy centers and from the statewide Child Advocacy Centers of Georgia of failures which OCA characterized as evidence of, quote, systemic threats to children who are victims of physical and sexual abuse. The following year, in 2022, OCA issued a report outlining 15 breakdowns within Georgia DFACS, which OCA described as, quote, systemic, and reported that in all cases they reviewed to produce this report, quote, DFACS failed to take adequate steps to respond to allegations of physical and sexual abuse, and that OCA itself encountered those same systemic failures, quote, consistently throughout the state through OCA's day-to-day investigative work. In response to this OCA investigation, Georgia DFACS vehemently denied OCA's findings, but OCA stood by its report. Last year, Georgia DFACS received many millions of dollars of federal funding. And as part of our inquiry, the subcommittee has reviewed in detail DFAC's own audits of its compliance with federal safety standards to protect children in their care. And here's what we found. DFACS does initiate timely investigations in almost 90% of the abuse and neglect reports that were audited. But DFACS systematically fails to actually address the risks and safety concerns associated with these children. According to DFAC's own internal assessment, DFACS fails in 84% of cases to, quote, make concerted efforts to assess and address risks and safety concerns to children in their own homes or in foster care, which is a federal child protection benchmark. According to HHS documentation, failing to assess risk and manage safety includes failing to report or formally assess and investigate maltreatment allegations about a family, failing to substantiate those allegations despite evidence that would support substantiation, and closing cases before safety concerns are adequately addressed. But this is not ultimately an investigation about statistics and bureaucratic terminology. This is an investigation about children, the most vulnerable children in our nation, orphaned children, children who have faced the most extreme forms of abuse and neglect imaginable, children who have been abandoned, children who rely upon state agencies and federal policy which oversees those state agencies as their last hope for safety. 2 years ago, I became a parent, And what we have learned is happening to children in the state's care and in the care of state agencies across the country is heartbreaking. Instead of safety, too many children have experienced neglect, abuse, apathy, humiliation, denied and delayed health care, human trafficking. I want to emphasize that this is an active and ongoing inquiry. Today, we will hear firsthand testimony from children and parents who have suffered from systemic failures to protect vulnerable children. We'll also hear from expert witnesses who will explain that these stories we hear today illustrate broader and long-standing failures to protect the most vulnerable children in Georgia and across the nation. I again thank Ranking Member Blackburn for her support and for her invaluable contributions to this bipartisan effort. I know, having worked closely with Senator Blackburn over the last year, how deeply she cares about the welfare of children. I have seen her passion displayed time and time again as an advocate for vulnerable children. And it is imperative that this work spur the long overdue reforms necessary both at the state level and in federal policy to protect America's most vulnerable children. I thank you all for your presence today and yield to Ranking Member Blackburn for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to begin by welcoming Senator Butler. We're delighted to have you as a part of our subcommittee and the Judiciary Committee, so welcome. We look forward to your participation, and I want to thank you all for being here. Each of our witnesses today, you've been open, you have testimony that we appreciate having, and we look forward to having your response to our questions as we move through today. I do thank Senator Ossoff and his team for the consistent work that they have done on this issue. Now, he mentioned that several months ago he started the investigation into what was happening with Georgia. And likewise, we looked at what was happening in Tennessee. That's important to do. These are the states that we represent, and looking at what is happening there is paramount to having an understanding of what is happening all across the country. And when we look at the foster care system, we know that the children that are there are not there because of something they have done. They are there because of situations or because of adults who have let them down, or a circumstance that has occurred in the life of a family. So what we have to do is make certain that these children, as Senator Ossoff said, the most vulnerable children, are not going to be let down by the system. And as our work here on the Human Rights Subcommittee, what we're doing is bringing this issue home and saying, let's start right here with where we are and look at the situations that are out there with children that are in our communities and in our states. And it is our duty to make certain that these children are going to be safe and that they are going to be protected from predators. They're going to be protected from traffickers, and that they know that they are surrounded by people who honestly care about them and care about their well-being. In February, I sent a letter over to the Tennessee Department of Children's Services expressing concern about several items. There was a 2022 finding and report regarding the agency's performance in protecting children that were in their care. In that letter, I expressed a commitment to work together with the state of Tennessee to better protect the children that are in the custody of DCS. Since that time, under the leadership of Commissioner Margie Quinn, the Department of Children's Services has undergone a complete and total overhaul. Commissioner Quinn, who, by the way, has done a phenomenal job in our state, working on issues of children being trafficked, making certain that children are being protected. Here are some of the things that she has done, and Mr. Chairman, I think these are so instructive to us and to how we solve this problem of protecting children in the state's custody. Commissioner Quinn has cut case manager vacancies in half, causing the caseloads to drop dramatically. And as of March 2023, not a single child was being housed in DCS offices. Another big benchmark. Now, in Tennessee, the faith-based community had stepped up to really fill the gap to house children immediately when they enter state custody. And 48 more beds in a clinical and secure setting will be opened by the end of the calendar year. Of course, there's always more to be done to protect these vulnerable children. And Commissioner Quinn has put in the work that is necessary to get this department on the proper footing. And I believe her response to my letter highlights a lot of that good work. And Mr. Chairman, I do want to enter that for the record.
Without objection.
And I think that what we will see is what they have done when they were presented with this situation is to move forward with corrective action that can help so many other states, and it will be a model for states that have these persistent problems. Now, we can't talk about protecting our foster care children without talking about the individuals who make a profit off exploiting our children. Human traffickers target those who they perceive to be the most vulnerable among us. So it should be no surprise that children in the foster care system are disproportionately targeted for sex and labor trafficking. I look forward to hearing from our experts today on how we can close that pipeline, which we have to close that pipeline between the foster care system and human trafficking, because until we put an end to child trafficking, we cannot truly fulfill our commitment and our goal of making certain that these boys and girls that are in our care are going to be protected. Thank you so much, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Ranking Member Blackburn, for your opening statement. And before we hear from those witnesses in our from those experts in our second panel, we're going to hear from two courageous witnesses in our first panel who have firsthand experiences interacting with the foster care system, Ranking Member Blackburn, in my home state of Georgia. Rachel Aldridge is the mother of Brooklyn Aldridge, who died in DFAC's custody in 2018 when Brooklyn was just 2 years old. Mon'a Houston is a 19-year-old from Savannah who recently signed out of DFAC's custody. Ms. Houston spent 5 years in 18 different placements, and only 2 of those placements were foster homes. The rest were group homes, institutions, or hotels. Before opening statements, it's the practice of the subcommittee to swear in witnesses. If you two, please, would kindly rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give before the subcommittee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please be seated. And Ms. Aldridge, it's now your turn to offer your opening statement. Please remember to hit that button to activate your microphone when you're ready. Thank you.
Chairman Ossoff, Ranking Member Blackburn, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Rachel Aldridge. I am only here today because of a broken system that led to the murder of my 2-year-old daughter, Brooklyn. In 2018, the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services, better known as DFACS, utterly failed to honor its responsibility to me and my daughter. My life will never be the same. Nothing can bring back my beautiful, sweet, and innocent Brooklyn. But I hope that my testimony can save another child's life and prevent families from having to go through what I experienced. That is why I took the first plane trip of my life to address the subcommittee. DFACS is supposed to protect children like Brooklyn. Instead, they violated my rights as her mother. They placed her in an unsafe home against my wishes, setting off a chain of events that led to her murder. The woman who killed my daughter is now serving a life sentence without parole. It took years to expose the problems that led to the preventable death of my child. Here's how the system failed Brooklyn and me. Before DFACS got involved, I had sole, uncontested custody of Brooklyn. On January the 14th, 2018, Brooklyn was removed from my care. That happened when I was wrongfully arrested and detained in jail for a week. The police called DFACS to the scene of arrest. DFACS was supposed to make sure Brooklyn was in a safe home while I was in jail.
Take your time, Miss Aldridge.
I promised myself I wasn't going to cry. Okay. I had already arranged for my sister, a registered nurse, and brother-in-law, a federal law enforcement agent, to take Brooklyn on the day of my arrest. They knew Brooklyn and are very close family members. She adored them. They were also certified foster parents. DFACS refused to honor my wishes and rejected them as responsible caregivers for Brooklyn. Instead, DFACS placed her in the home of her father. He was not actively involved in her life. He was not legally recognized as her father and is not a certified foster care parent. More importantly, he did not have custody of Brooklyn. I was released from jail days later, and my first stop was to Brooklyn's father's home to pick up my daughter. I was so worried about her because she had never spent the night away from me. Brooklyn was very excited to see me, and I expected to take her home, but I didn't. But her father told me no and showed me paperwork that I later learned was a forged DFACS safety plan. The forgery said that if I took Brooklyn, he had to call law enforcement. I felt I had no choice and left Brooklyn at his home. I was distraught when I left her that night. Brooklyn's father had a live-in girlfriend who cared for Brooklyn while he was at work. I was very worried about that because I believed his girlfriend was using methamphetamine. I saw her messages to drug dealers. Since Brooklyn's father often worked overtime shifts, I was very concerned about leaving her alone with his girlfriend. The next day, I spoke to a DFACS supervisor. She told me Brooklyn's father had temporary custody of her. I shared my concerns with the supervisor about his live-in girlfriend caring for my daughter and the signs of meth use in the home. I begged the DFACS supervisor to move Brooklyn to my sister and brother-in-law's house where she would be safe. The supervisor ignored my pleas. Brooklyn stayed at her father's house for another agonizing 6 weeks, and there was nothing I could do about it. Brooklyn died on March 6, 2018. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the back of the head, and the girlfriend was convicted of murder in Brooklyn. Jesus Christ. I filed a wrongful death lawsuit against DFAC's caseworkers, and my complaint alleged DFACs did not take immediate action after I repeatedly told them about my concerns about Amanda Coleman's suspected drug use. The system meant to protect children failed Brooklyn at every level, from management down to the caseworker repeatedly. They failed to follow the policies meant to keep my child safe and violated our rights. Brooklyn's death cannot be in vain. I am here today to seek change. The child welfare system is supposed to protect families, not destroy them. Brooklyn would still be alive if anyone at DFACS had just been willing to listen to me, her own mother. We need better oversight of the system to ensure the safety of all Georgia families. I am grateful for the support I've received. I am grateful to my attorney, Brent Savage, for all the work he has done. Senators, you can stop this from happening again. You have the power to change the system. Please remember Brooklyn. Thank you.
Ms. Aldridge, thank you on behalf of the whole subcommittee for your courageous testimony and for sharing your story with us. And Ms. Houston, when you're ready, it's your turn now to deliver your opening statement.
Chairman Ossoff, Ranking Member Blackburn, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Mon'a Houston. I am 19 years old, and I am here today to share my experience as a former foster youth in DFAC's system in Georgia. I was in care from 2017 to 2022. During that time, I had 18 placements. Only 2 were foster homes. The rest were group homes, institutions, or hotels. I had 3 case managers. Only 1 regularly visited me and answered my phone calls. I would often go more than 6 months without seeing my caseworker. I felt alone. One of the worst parts about being in care is that I was over-medicated. DFACS kept telling my doctors to up my dosage because I was not behaving. I was over-medicated to the point of feeling overtired and sluggish. It hurt to walk, but I had trauma and no one to talk about it with. The only time I regularly saw a therapist was when I was in Devereaux Advanced Behavioral Health for 10 months. Devereaux was a maximum security residential treatment program. I was in a behavioral program similar to a group home but with more security. It was a lockdown facility. It had 2 barbed wire fences. You never left the campus, not for school, outings, or food. I only left for doctor's appointments. During this time, I was often physically restrained. They slammed me into walls and put my arms into locks. They would wrap their legs around me so I couldn't move. At 3 different times, I was put into isolation for more than 5 days. The isolation room was similar to a jail cell, and I was treated as an inmate. You had to request access to the bathroom. I wasn't allowed to shower. Even when my menstrual cycle, I couldn't wash or change for 3 days. This was the darkest time in a placement. Education was challenging while I was in care. Because I was moving placements so much, the only education I would get would be online. I asked my case managers and my placements for a tutor because I struggled with understanding. But no one would listen. Eventually, I just gave up. I still haven't completed my GED. My most traumatic experience was when I was arrested at 17. The group home showed the police a video that didn't include me getting attacked first. Staff didn't de-escalate the situation. On September 7th, I was taken to jail from September 7th to November 8th in Americus, Georgia. When I was in jail, I was scared and alone, and I didn't know anything about what was going to happen. My caseworker never called me. This was my first time ever getting in trouble. No one from DFACS bought me any medications that I was on, which resulted in significant depression. I'm sorry. After a month in jail, the sheriff was trying to help me get out for my 18th birthday, which is October 26th. They said I could be released on a $200 bail. DFACS refused to pay my bail. I could only be released to DFACS custody. I was at DFACS's mercy, and they left me there for another month. The sheriff finally offered an OR bond, and on November 8th, I was released to de facto custody. They picked me up and put me in a hotel for 2 weeks. The hotel was my last placement. I thought my case manager was finally coming to see me, but she sent somebody else instead, like always. This person told me to sign a bunch of papers. I was so angry that my caseworker didn't show up that I just signed the papers. I was furious. If I knew what the papers said, I would have never signed them. The person said to me, "You just signed yourself out of care. You need to be checked out of the hotel by 11 a.m., and we are not responsible to help you get back to Savannah once you sign out." My attorney and counsel was not present. They were unaware of the papers being presented to me. They left me at the hotel in Columbus, Georgia. If it wasn't for one kind behavior aid, I would have never knew how to get back to Savannah. I'm doing this so other youth know that they can come out on the other side. I was 17 when I was finally assigned a court-appointed specialist advocate, CASA. Ms. Page was the first adult who listened to me. She would regularly fight with defects to get me what I needed. I had one good case manager who showed she cared about me and listened to me, and now I'm connected with Brightside Advocacy, which supports me and provides me with hope.
Ms. Houston,
Yes, ma'am.
did you say your birthday is tomorrow?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think that calls for a big happy birthday. Everybody in.
Oh, my God. Thank you.
Bet you didn't know that was coming. Thank you both for your powerful personal testimonies and for sharing these stories with the Senate and with the public to help the public understand that we're talking about human beings. We're talking about real families. We're talking about real youth who move through the system. Ms. Aldridge, my daughter is about to turn 2 in December, the same age as Brooklyn when she was murdered. And so as a father, I want to thank you for sharing Brooklyn's story with us today. And I know there are no words that can describe the pain. And I'm so sorry for everything that you and Brooklyn have been through.
Thank you.
I am entering into the record a motion for pretrial summary judgment that was filed in Ms. Aldridge's wrongful death lawsuit against the DFACS caseworkers who handled Brooklyn's case. Now, Ms. Aldridge, DFACS placed your daughter in the care of her father, Mr. Lott, and his girlfriend, Ms. Coleman. But you were still Brooklyn's custodial parent, and you had the right to object to that placement. Did DFACS ever tell you that?
No, sir.
If you had known that DFACS needed your consent, would you have agreed to let Brooklyn stay with Mr. Lott and Ms. Coleman?
Definitely not. I would have took my daughter home. She had never been away from me before, ever. Never.
And you knew that or suspected that Ms. Coleman was dangerous, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
DFACS had a policy requiring it to run background checks on people who take care of children. But DFACS didn't run that background check, did they?
No, sir.
And if they had run a background check, they would have found that Ms. Coleman had a criminal history and that DFACS had previously pursued a child neglect case against her, correct?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Aldridge, court records show that when you visited Brooklyn, you noticed there was a bruise on her leg. Did you report that bruise to DFACS?
I did.
But even after you reported that bruise, DFACS kept Brooklyn with Ms. Coleman, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
How did that make you feel?
Helpless. All I wanted to do was take my daughter home, and I couldn't. That's it. I just wanted my baby.
And Ms. Aldridge, your daughter Brooklyn was then killed from blunt force trauma to her head, and Ms. Coleman was convicted of her murder, correct?
Yes, sir.
Court records show that after Brooklyn was murdered, you received a Facebook message from Brooklyn's caseworker, Ms. Beaumier, who wrote to you, quote, "You did not fail her, DFACS did." How did you feel when you received that message?
Like it was too late. I mean, my daughter was already dead. There was nothing. I just felt helpless. Like the system that was put in place to protect my daughter failed her.
If DFACS had followed its own policies, had sought your consent for this placement, had run the background check that they were required to run, had listened to you when you reported that you had seen bruising on your daughter's body, do you believe Brooklyn would still be alive today?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Aldridge, you've been through every parent's absolute worst nightmare. And I'm sorry. And I think all of us are grateful that you've taken the time and summoned the courage to relive this and to share it with the public and the Senate. Why have you chosen today to take that step?
So what happened to Brooklyn doesn't happen to anybody else.
Thank you, Ms. Aldridge. I'll yield to Ranking Member Blackburn for her questions.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much. Mon'a, I want to come to you. When we look at having caseworkers that are appropriate for the job
Yes, ma'am.
and that are going to have that duty of care to the children that they're responsible for, what I'd love to have from you for the record is talk to me about what a caseworker should do. If you had had a perfect caseworker, how would they have worked with you, encouraged you, listened to you, helped provide and protect you?
Well, nobody's perfect, but they didn't do their job. They were supposed to see me every month in person. They never saw me every month in person. Maybe if she would have came to my group home where I was at and saw me in person, she could have thought about moving me, but she never came to see me. They're supposed to let me go to my court.
Let me pop in right there. Now, this was over how many years?
5.
Over 5 years. Okay. So she should have seen you once a month for 5 years. And you said in your testimony about once every 6 months you would hear from them.
She's supposed to see us in person every month.
Right. Okay. Good.
And I had 3 caseworkers. Only one of them actually did their job. She came all the way 5 hours away to the lockdown facility to see me. Nobody's perfect, but they didn't listen. And when I acted out was the only time that they would ever answer their phone. If I was like when I had gotten into an accident, they did not answer the phone. But when it was time for me to leave that placement, that's when they would answer. They didn't answer at the times that they should, only when it was time to move my placement.
So if you were talking to Children's Services and you were writing the job description for somebody that is going to be a caseworker, what would you put in that job description to meet young girls like you? What would you want to see them do on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis?
Well, listen to the children.
Okay.
I'll need them to check in with them as they should every month. Make sure that their placement is comfortable for them. Don't just stick them somewhere and not answer the phone for them no more. Don't just tell them the only reason you're on meds is because you don't behave. Like, make them feel loved. Make them feel like they have a family in care at least.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Ms. Aldridge, as I read your testimony, I thought about parental rights and parents having rights. And as you have been through such a terrible ordeal, and I know it's something that your heart grieves every single day. And you said that you were doing this because you don't want other moms to have to live through what you've lived through. So now looking back on your ordeal, what would be the steps you would encourage other women who find themselves in the situation where you were? What would you say, here's a way to preserve your parental rights?
Get an attorney. I would definitely say an attorney is know your rights. I guess study about it. I don't have no idea. I would definitely say having an attorney. Having an attorney would, I don't know, you would have understood what your rights were. I mean, you can go with your gut, but just having an attorney, that's a big thing, I think, having an attorney.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Welch.
Well, thank you. By the way, not that I've been in the Senate that long, but that was the best happy birthday ever. Thank you. She's from Nashville, you can tell. But first of all, it's really moving for all of us to be here with you and to have you tell us what you've been through. So I want to thank you, and we all do, and it really matters. You know, so much of our time here is spent on things that seem a little bit abstract. To have two people who've experienced a very searing situation come in and share it has a powerful impact. And I know the chairman and the ranking member and Senator Butler and I want to do all we can to help improve the situation. You know, my questions have been asked largely because I'll just give you each a chance to just describe what you think would improve the situation. I mean, you said, Ms. Aldridge, having a lawyer would really make a difference. I know that's true. I was a public defender, and I was involved in many cases involving parental rights. And the state of Vermont made certain that everyone was represented, the parents and the child, and it forced people to take things very seriously and not just wave it off. So I think that's a really, really good recommendation. I thank you for that. And Ms. Houston, thank you. You seem to be doing pretty good.
No, that is Kate here.
Well, that's great, but it's amazing what you said earlier is you're here so that other people who went through what you did can see that they can get to the other side, and I think you're really demonstrating that. You know, when you were asked about a good system, what I heard you saying basically is the people who are supposed to be like your caseworkers have to take this situation and the relationship seriously, that you were isolated and alone, and not just when you were put in isolation, but the whole time, whatever it is you were going through, you had nobody to help you along the way. Is that more or less a correct
Yes, sir.
assessment? Yeah, and by the way, you know, all of us need a little help along the way, especially when we're in a situation that's totally alien. But you told me you had 19 placements in foster
18.
18 in foster care. So how long would you be there before you were gone somewhere else?
4 months.
So minimal sustained relationships with with a parental figure or even with friends, I imagine.
I never had friends.
Right. So you were bouncing from school to school and never had an opportunity to have your feet solidly on the ground. Yeah, I mean, that's just really, really shocking. You have no chance with that.
It got to a point where I was self-harm because I didn't know nobody to talk to.
Right. Well, it's really shocking. It's inexcusable, and I think all of us are very, very sad that was so much a part of your life so far. But I think it's inspiring to see you here being strong. And Ms. Aldridge, the same thing. I'm just, we're parents, and you suffered the loss that all of us feel the most. And thank you for being here to try to help other people out. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Welch. Senator Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership on this issue. Having a conversation with such courageous women like Ms. Aldridge and Ms. Houston really is an honor for us. And we owe you a debt of gratitude for organizing such a thoughtful hearing and set of witnesses and conversation. I have a 9-year-old daughter who is adopted. My family and I went through the certification process in California, in Los Angeles County, to become certified foster parents. That wound up not being our final path, but I experienced the other side of the system and the deficiencies that exist, the gaps, the imperfect but hardworking people in most instances who try their best to get it right. Ms. Houston, I'd like to start with you, if it's okay. I just want to appreciate so much you coming and sharing your story, and I couldn't help but notice you being so moved by Ms. Aldridge's story. And that level of empathy and human connection, I just wanted to recognize for the record, the world would tell us that we are all so different.
That's me all the time.
Right, and to see you, to see your heart be pained by another human's tragedy, I think is just an example and a reminder that there is more that binds us, even in the painful times, than that divides us. It was an interesting to hear you talk about your treatment as care. You talked about the care that you received as has been sort of interrogated or questioned a little bit by my colleagues. I think the fact that you refer to it as care says so much about who you are. Here's my question to you. There was a moment in your testimony when you referred to an individual whose intervention seemed as if it had a positive impact on you. And I want to give some breath and offer you the opportunity to give a little bit about that CASA worker who was assigned to you, who made your soul smile. And talk to us about that experience and how that helped to support you to get to this moment.
Okay, right before I went to jail, like maybe 3 months before, I met Miss Page. Miss Kate assigned her to me. And when she came all the way from Savannah to see me, I did not want to talk to her. Like, I was shooing her away. I was like, just go away. Like, just go back to Savannah. I'm okay. And she would not give up on me. Like, she kept prying her way in until she got in. And then eventually I got out of care because of the situation. I signed the papers on accident. And she still was there for me. She did not let me sleep outside. Like, she reached out to CASA program, and she worked, like, hard with them to get me somewhere to be. Like, they even got me back in care. And the foster system did not want me back, and they still made it happen. So I just want to thank Miss Page, and she's still here in my life. She takes my phone, cheering me on right now. I thank her a lot.
I think we all thank Ms. Page. There are lots of Ms. Pages in the world, as many as there are who let you down. There are some Ms. Pages out there, and we're grateful for it. You were going to offer something additional.
It's crazy because a lot of people that I try to push away, they actually leave, but she didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of Miss Pages. In my life, her name was Miss Pearl. So we all have a Miss Page or Miss Pearl. Just quickly before I run out of time, Miss Aldridge, as a parent, I couldn't imagine the pains of what you went through. I remember my daughter turned 2, and she just turned 9, and thinking about her life being cut short, I just could not imagine it. So I want to appreciate your courage for sharing your story, for not swallowing what others would have us to believe as personal shame, but for giving voice to young Brooklyn. I would just ask you, you said a lot about like the reason you being here is to prevent this kind of harm and tragedy for other Brooklyns that might be in the system, and I think for other Miss Aldridges who might be in the system as well. Do you think that there's something unique about your experience in Georgia, or are there other parents and or children that you know? Is there something that we should be paying attention to that that families might have in common? Where we can think across the system and across the states to try to answer the call that you put before this subcommittee to act and save other families.
I don't know. I have no idea. Can you
Yeah, I guess without knowing any details and only hearing your testimony and reading your written testimony, I guess I wonder, are there other people that you might know in the Georgia system that had similar negative experiences?
I mean, personally, I don't know anyone else. No, ma'am.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it, and most of all, I appreciate you being here and giving voice to parents and to young people. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Butler. And before we move to the next panel, Ms. Houston, I'm just going to ask you a few more questions just to make sure the record reflects what you've experienced and what you need the public to understand about what you've experienced based upon your opening statement. You described being over-medicated while in a maximum security facility. Tell us what that means. How did it feel?
I was over-medicated the whole time, the whole 5 years. I felt like sluggish, like I couldn't move, and it started affecting my physical. I started eating a lot, and one time I went to court and my judge even said she's on too many meds. Somebody has to take her off some of these meds or lower the dosages. The next day after court, I went back to my psychiatrist and they upped my dosages. So, and I feel like it made me worse rather than better because they only put me on the medicines to make me behave. Instead of putting me on meds to help my mental health, they just wanted me to sit down and behave for them. And they never talked to me about what was wrong. They never asked me any questions. They just said, she doesn't behave and she needs meds. So I felt, and I also, as I kept eating, it gave me high cholesterol. I was pre-diabetic. And I kept telling my psychiatrist, like, is there any meds that does not have this hunger effect, this appetite effect? And They did not take me off of the meds. My DFACS caseworker was telling my psychiatrist that I needed those meds, that I don't behave, that I need those meds to behave.
So it sounds like the impression you got, and indeed what they may have said at the time, despite what a judge had said, was that this wasn't about your mental health, it was about controlling your behavior.
Yes, sir.
Did I hear correctly that at one of your placements you were slammed against the floor or the
Yes,
wall
at the lockdown facility.
and placed in solitary confinement for up to 5
Yes,
days
sir.
at a time? And were you threatened with solitary confinement as a punishment?
Yes.
You mentioned this in your opening remarks in your exchange with Senator Blackburn, that DFACS has a policy requiring your caseworker to visit you monthly, and that at one time you were in jail while you were in foster care, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were kept there for about 2 months?
Yes, sir.
And after 1 month, you were cleared to be released, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And why weren't you released at that point?
Because DFACS told me that they didn't want to be responsible for me getting back to court. Or because when you sign a bond, you're responsible for that person. Like, if I don't show up to court, they could get in trouble. So they didn't want to be responsible for that,
So the jail was prepared to release you, but DFACS wouldn't come pick you up.
basically.
Ms. Houston, I want to echo what Senator Butler said, and thank you for your courage and also for your spirit. I can tell you, we hold a lot of these hearings. We speak to a lot of folks, and the warmth and compassion and kindness that you radiate, I think, has lifted all of us up, particularly in light of the tremendously difficult circumstances that you're describing. And to see you here not just persevering and surviving, but in fact using your voice to fight for other youth who are going through the same thing and to make a difference has inspired all of us. So thank you, Ms. Houston.
Thank you.
you, Ms. Aldridge, for your courageous testimony. We are going to now take a brief recess so that members can go and vote. We have a vote on the floor. We will then return and reconvene with panel 2. And so the subcommittee stands in recess.